All right, the way the rest of our meeting is going to proceed, so this is kind of a hybrid cottage meeting and question and answer and debate session for these candidates. We're going to give each about 15 to 20 minutes, whatever they're comfortable with. We're not timing you, but to stand up and share your platform with everyone here. And during that first part, we'll let them present. There'll be a time for questions after that. Afterwards, I'll ask Jason to be our moderator for the debate question and answer. He's going to lead with a few questions I think we probably all want to know from these two candidates. And then we'll open it up to questions that each of you have, and he'll be more of a spotter, and we'll let you pose your question. We'll let each candidate answer. The way we'll do it is, first question, we always go ladies first, then Trent.
I'm glad that you know what a lady is.
And let's give them each an opportunity to respond. We can alternate order. That's fine with me. But just give them each an opportunity to respond to the questions that we pose. And we can go as long as y'all would like to go. And I would ask, please don't live beneath your privileges. My wife raised some amazing treats. Once you have those, you'll agree. But feel free to get over there and get a drink and get some cookies or something. But we are grateful to have you in our home. I have not known these two for very long. Spoken with Trent a few times, and he's been very good about sharing his thoughts on some questions that I had and concerns. Trent's been the mayor of Riverton 10 years now, or is it longer?
7 years.
7 years. Oh, I was trying to make it longer.
10 years.
Okay, that's why I had the 10 stuck in my mind. Like a lot of the things that he has done as a mayor, and excited to see him running for Senate. Carolyn has been, I don't want to put a label on her by saying she's been in the political scene because that might downgrade what she does, but she's been very active in helping different people in office, Mike Lee and others, in their work, and also is part of some organizations that help get good laws passed, and I'm grateful for her work and being able to get to know her. We've had her here a couple of times. For all of you who are interested, we're going to have Phil Lyman here on the 30th, so please come back. We would love to have you come and ask him some questions. So without further ado, I will let Carolyn take a few minutes to present her platform, and then Trent, and then we'll move to the question and answer portion.
Okay. So I will tell you, you may need to cut me off, Chad. My husband and I have been married 31 years, and he was driving us somewhere for an event a couple weeks ago, and I said, I just have talked nonstop for days. I need to close my eyes. And he was like, oh, it's okay. You don't need to say a word, honey. It's like the first time in our marriage that I'm not trying to talk. So go ahead and cut me off when that 15 or 20 minutes is up. But I am going to give you a bit of my history, both personally, and then talk to you about what I've done and what my priorities are in the Senate. So I will go way back. My parents are from Utah, got in a car right after getting married and drove across the country to complete my dad's education at Cornell University. I was born and raised in New York. I like to say I was raised a Mormon in New York. I have no problems, like if the crowd is going this way, going the other way, because truth is truth, and I will stand on it all day long. And I will tell you that is one of the biggest problems that we have with those people we elect, where they are more interested in making friends than in doing and in getting things done than they are in getting the right things done and making the difficult decisions and standing on truth and speaking truth. So that has been my entire life's history. In fact, in my early 20s, all my friends were like liberal hippies, including one of my favorite mission companions. And those were interesting discussions. I will just say, and another one of my trainers, we were the first sisters into Czechoslovakia when I served my mission, and I had been at BYU actually studying Soviet government and economy and political science, and then went there right after the wall came down to what had been one of the Soviet republics. And one of my trainers, my companion, and I were the first sisters to go in. And so one of my trainers is now a 70, which is kind of funny, and he's a liberal. And we still like each other, but we disagree on almost everything. So I will say this, except for the very most important things in our lives, and that is that for 20 years I stayed home raising, I almost said 20 boys. Oh my gosh, 5 boys. So I was at BYU. I came out here to BYU. I've been here for 35 years in Utah. I left just for that period when I served my mission, came back to BYU for 1 semester and was engaged very quickly. We had known each other before, I'll just say. But my husband would not set foot on the BYU campus, so I transferred to the U. And so whichever school you like, I like them both. Although the BYU is better, I'm just going to say it. And but graduated from the U in political science while I was home raising our boys. I always stayed home. My husband always worked hard while both of us were in school so that I could stay and raise our children. And I was very involved in the community in a number of different ways, in a volunteer capacity on a number of boards, and volunteered and donated to some different organizations that we helped drive good policy and programs, all privately funded, by the way, that helped at-risk children. And so about 15 years ago, I started writing for politicians, conservatives only, across the country. And 10 years ago, I went to work for Greg Hughes when he was Speaker of the House. I was his chief of communications there and worked on, I could get into details, and we will if you ask the right questions, on some of the important conservative policy that I worked on at the House. And then when I knew he wasn't going to run again, I went to go work for Senator Mike Lee. And I was Mike's intergovernmental affairs advisor in the state of Utah, where I worked with elected officials around the state on kind of that overlap on federal, state, and local policy. I know, number one, federal policy better than anybody in this race. And I also understand how it translates into constitutional principles. And I tell people all the time, we don't talk about this. The Constitution is simply the document that lays out your protections against the power and force of government. So if you don't support it, just tell me which liberties that God gave you that you are willing to turn over to government. Just name them for me. I've never met anyone who can. And so it is so important. We have blown through, especially federally, all of the restraints that the Constitution placed on government and government officials. And that is the very reason we're dealing with so many of the problems that we're dealing with in this nation. And so somebody who understands that and has worked, and I mean worked diligently on these issues from a policy-making standpoint, is somebody who can serve us well in the Senate. Let's see. After leaving Mike's office about 2 years ago, I worked for an organization called Freedom Front. It was founded by a number of mostly tech executives who were very concerned with what they saw happening in this state. It came to the fore during COVID, and they saw massive government overreach unconstitutionally in everything in our lives. So they funded an organization and recruited me away to run it, where we worked on some policy, but our main focus is an educational focus on individual liberties and free markets. And so that was what we did. I did for a couple years before leaving my job about 6 months ago to run for office and get ready for this run. I'm currently on the board. I'm also on the board of Utah Citizens for the Constitution and the Why I Love America Committee, which, by the way, was fundamental. It was the organization, Utah Citizens for the Constitution was the organization that last year in 2023 got legislation passed by Kevin Stratton, by the way, that designates the month of September Founders and Constitution Month. If we're celebrating months, we might as well celebrate one that is about the founders and the Constitution. And the Why I Love America Committee was formed out of that. Ted Collister leads that. I sit on that committee, and we work on putting together all kinds of things. We don't want to drive it all, but we're only in just finished up our first year of even existence. We're hoping that individuals throughout the communities, families, and all kinds of not only governmental organizations, but especially religious organizations will pick up where we leave off. We had to raise a lot of money to do it last year. We do not get any government funding, by the way. It is all private donations. And so we had all kinds of things, and we put together a number of different interfaith events. We have got to reignite a spirit of patriotism in this country. And I don't know if any of you saw a year or two ago, I think it was a couple years ago, the Wall Street Journal did a poll showing a massive downturn in patriotism in the United States of America. Each one of us is responsible to make a change with regard to that in our own families, homes, and communities. My top priorities in the Senate are very broad. I'm happy to, in the question and answer time, delve into specific policy priorities, including the REINS Act, which I worked on when I worked for Mike Lee. I'll tell you more about that in question and answer. But my main broad areas are three things. One, the protection of this nation physically. We have a southern border that is being completely ignored and invaded, and a federal government whose number one responsibility is to protect this nation, and they are failing. The more they focus on those things that are not their fundamental duty, the more they fail, anyone notice this, at those things that are. And that is exactly what's happening with our southern border. All the laws are in place. We do not need more laws. In order for that border to be shut down, we need an executive branch that actually does the job of the executive branch instead of the job of the judicial branch and the job of the legislative branch, which it is doing in a number of respects. So physical protection of this nation, that also includes, by the way, our military, that we are struggling to recruit for right now because the priorities in that organization are all out of whack. I have a number of friends who've retired in the last few years for that very reason. And we will not be a safe and secure nation if we cannot build a strong military to protect us. Number two, we have got to, I wish I could say preservation of the Constitution. We're beyond that. It is all about like reinvigoration and reinstitution of constitutional principles. I also sit in the Salt Lake County GOP. I am chair of the Federalism Committee, and that is, we say the word federalism and people think, oh, federal power, federalism. We don't even use this word commonly in our vernacular. Federalism is about reestablishing the power and the sovereignty of the state against the federal government, whose powers are very limited and defined constitutionally. So pushing back against those. So, and there's so many other constitutional areas that we need to work on. Additionally, and again, all of these things that I'm happy to go into more detail on in question and answer, we have an economy that is no longer providing opportunity for the next generation. 3/4 of the jobs being created right now are government jobs. I'll give it just a sec while I take a drink.
Yeah. This is our intermission. I will sing a song.
And I need to drink anyway, so it's perfect.
We're just adding more chairs.
We're just so popular. Hey, Scott, would you give me that?
Well, you know what's funny is there are more people here tonight than were at the Democrat caucus.
The entire. Oh, right.
Imagine that.
They all came to the Republic.
Didn't they meet at some
They did all come to the Republic. I have Democrat friends who showed up in my precinct. One of them did not bring her ID and said, oh, we have to have ID. I'm like, yeah, we're Republicans. We care about voter integrity. So she actually left and never came back because the lines were too long by the time she got back. And I'm like, very good. That's how that should work. But anyway, I'll give it just a sec. So, opportunity in our economy. That is what has allowed our country to thrive. And that is what has kept us. You know, you think about, I'm just going to go back historically really briefly. You think about what has caused society after society to fail. And so much it is these divisions within the society that most of the time come from economic division and lack of opportunity. We have always been an economy of opportunity, and that is beginning to change. So when government is driving the jobs in our economy, we have a problem. And that's where we are right now. And the REINS Act that I referenced a minute ago ties into that, where we have the bureaucratic state in Washington, the executive branch agencies creating law that are strangling private business. And there are a number of things. We're all dealing with inflation, 25% increase in food prices in the past 3 years, and 19%. We have a President Biden likes to talk about a decrease in inflation. Yeah, but we still have the whole 19% that you gave us over the last 3 years. And have no doubt about it, once this election is over, I don't think anything slows down. I think, of course, we all know that the Fed will play the games it needs to play to get us through this next election, and then good luck economically. I last year built a greenhouse and bought chickens. So that's how much I trust the Biden economy. So I'm going to stop there. Those are my 3 main priorities. I look forward to answering further questions when we get to that point, but I'll turn it over to you, Trent.
I just got to say thank you to the Shaddocks. I mean, this is incredible. They told me, I said, how many do you expect? He said, about 20 people. And I'm counting more than that in the first 2 rows. So it's really remarkable. This view is incredible. I mean, thank you for hosting. And I think what's the most incredible thing is to see so many of you engaged and so many that rose their hands that they're delegates, right? Because you're talking to 2 of, I think, only 3 or so candidates that are going the caucus convention system only. And that... yeah, you can clap at that. That's one of the things that I committed to from the very beginning, and I feel that is the best way by which we can nominate our candidates. That is the way by which we should be nominating our candidates, because you are so informed. And I said that from the very beginning. We've been very successful. I could have gone out and gathered signatures and paid for those, but you know what? No. I made a commitment, and I'm a man of my word from the very beginning of this race. Let me tell you a little bit about me and my family and my why, and then get into some of my platform, and then look forward to your questions. I grew up in Orem, attended Orchard Elementary School in my elementary school years. My family moved to South Jordan when I was in high school and finished up at Bingham High School, and then ended up going to the University of Utah for my undergraduate degree in political science and economics. And then I got my MBA from BYU. I've been fortunate enough to be raised in a family of 10 kids. I've got 7 sisters and 2 brothers. And my dad started out as a high school teacher and football coach. We had no money. I didn't know any different. And I say that any modicum of success that I've been able to attain is only because God is good and because we live in the best country on earth. And I believe that. So after graduate school, I had a couple of different jobs in finance, working at Morgan Stanley. I operated some of my own companies. I was asked, probably starting about 10 years ago, to help operate other companies and then usually maintain a spot on their board seat when I got them back on their feet or brought them to a level of profitability. Most recently, that happened with an energy company. We took that company public, got listed in NASDAQ back in 22. So energy independence, or I've been saying energy dominance, for me is very, very important. There's another candidate in this race that started stealing that phrase, that chairs a climate caucus, and I find it curious that they're now actually going out there trying to present themselves as somebody who is all about energy dominance. Let me tell you, I mean it when I say it. For the last, as Chad was saying, the last 10, 11 years now, I've had the privilege of serving my community in Riverton. And I started out on the city council, and the last almost 2 terms now as mayor. I'm going in my 7th year as mayor. And in that time, I've really tried to take my entrepreneurial or business experience and apply that to municipal government. And I found that we've been able to drive costs down. We've made government more efficient, looking at it more like a business. I've actually cut property taxes. I don't know how many people can say that. They live in a city where your mayor's actually cut your property taxes. And for the last 10 years, we've seen relatively no net fee increase. And I've got a 5-year outlook that has us not raising fees or taxes for that amount of time. And I think that's pretty remarkable in the inflationary environment that we live in that Carolyn was just describing under this horrific Biden administration. So that's a little bit of my background. My wife and I, as to why we're doing this, I believe in term limits. I'm self-imposing. I said we're not going to serve more than 2 terms as mayor. And that's something that's important to me. I think we have a citizen-led government, and we should do our time, try to serve the best that we can, and then sit down and let other people do it. And in fact, if you go to my city council chambers in Riverton, you'll see that up on the dais, I intentionally put in the pieces of art and other things that are there. And to the right is an image of our Constitution, and to the left is the oath of office. And so it's very clear to me, I did that intentionally. Hey, elected officials, this is the document. Here's your oath that you have sworn to support, obey, and defend. And then at the back, so that it's constant view of us, my favorite painting is that of George Washington resigning his commission at the Maryland State House. And that to me is the reminder that this is not a lifetime gig. And we serve. And we do that out of that spirit of service, not to enrich ourselves, not for power, not for glory, but for the betterment of our community, our state, and our nation. And so, in discussions with my wife, she said, hey, is there something else that we should do? Should I just pivot back to the business world? People ask if I'm a full-time or part-time mayor. I say I'm all the time. I'm paid part-time, however. So I have these other efforts that I'm involved with. But, do we just go to the business world? Or is there another office that we might be able to serve in? And I truly believe it's a joint effort between me and my wife. I couldn't do it without her. And this race kept coming back to us. I had a lot of policy disagreements with Mitt Romney. I remember in 2018 as a mayor, he came to me and asked for my support, and I asked him, what were you planning to do? And he told me what he put in a 30-second spot called Fight For. You can see it on his website. And I took a portion of that and put it in my launch video that's now been viewed well over 1 million times. And he said, Utah, if you elect me as your senator, I will fight for you every day. I'll put us on a path to a balanced budget. I'll end illegal immigration. I'll stop federal spending and overreach, and I'll confirm conservative justices to the court. Not his record, right? 5 years later. And I said, we can't have this anymore. Utah deserves another Mike Lee. Utah deserves a true constitutional conservative representing us. But beyond the policy disagreements, I saw the way in which he represented, and I might use that term very loosely, Utahns. As a state delegate, doesn't bother to show up to convention. I talked with many other mayors and county commissioners and chamber presidents that would go back to D.C. to visit the federal delegation. Mike Lee would make time, but very rarely would Mitt Romney. And if he did, true story, people said he'd just be looking at his watch, seemingly disinterested. That bothered me, because as a mayor, I visit and make time for anybody. Even those that I know didn't even vote for me, right? I'm there to represent them. And then what was the kind of the straw that broke the camel's back for me was in March, last March, I was asked to chair the Salt Lake County GOP Organizing Commission. Chris Knoll, that's the county chair, is a Riverton resident. He said, Trent, I'm going to run again for chair. The bylaws preclude me from running the meeting. Can you do it? I said, yeah, sure, I'll chair it. Reach out to the federal delegation. Every single one came in person or presented a video to the 1,200 delegates, except for Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney's final response, no thanks, I'll yield my time. So I see that, and I say, this isn't right. We need better representation. And I spoke to my wife about that. We said, and this was the title of an op-ed that I wrote, Enough is Enough, Why I'm Going to Replace Mitt Romney. And so we launched, announced my candidacy in May last year. I've been on the campaign trail for 10 months. And I think that's important. We went out there and said, irrespective of whether Mitt Romney's running again, we're going to take him on. And every other candidate in this race has come in subsequent to the fact when he said, I'm not going to seek re-election in late September. So he started out at about 50% favorability in the polls. We put our video out there, got viewed 1 million plus times. We probably just last year did around 50 town halls across the state and heard from many, many people. Reminded many people about those promises in that Fight For video and what he's actually delivered. And he went down to about 30% favorability. He said in September, I'm not going to seek re-election. Came as no surprise to me. So I think, and I appreciate Chad saying that we're, I guess, his favorite candidates. I think we're arguably the two most conservative candidates in the race. I don't know if you're going to see tonight a lot of daylight between some of the things that we might do from a voting standpoint. I just don't. I want to get to that and get to your questions, and I'll answer them as directly as I possibly can, which not all candidates do. But I think what is very important is that we have somebody in office that has been in a position of authority or power and has actually stood up and showed a little bit of spine and a little bit of backbone to say no, that they're willing to push back on the establishment. Because I've been saying that's the problem. That's why we're $34.5 trillion in debt. When I started my launch video, we were $32 trillion in debt. It's insane. And people asked about my why. My why is because not on my watch. That's why. That's why I'm doing this, because we've been blessed to do something, my wife and I. And I've got a 14-year-old son and an 11-year-old daughter. And I've said, it is the height of immorality to have placed that level of debt on their heads and on successive generations. It's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. So that's why. That's why we're doing this. And I've stood up, not just in the way in which I've run my race, being able to take on Mitt Romney and the establishment, but I've also, and if you go to TrentStaggs.com, there's a page there called Proven Fighter. And it has a lot of media links. But it has my endorsement of President Trump back in July of last year. I wrote an opinion piece in the Washington Times, even at a time when DeSantis was kind of neck and neck in the polls here in Utah, or in some instances ahead. I said, no, we need President Trump back in office. I also stood up to mask mandates and vaccine mandates. As a mayor, from the very beginning, back in March of 2020, when Salt Lake County Mayor Jenny Wilson said it'd be a Class B misdemeanor, punishable by a $1,000 fine or imprisonment if you had more than 10 people gathered together. That was insane. And I went out straight away, you can see the link there on my page, and I addressed my citizens in Riverton and said, this is unconstitutional. I will not use our police department to enforce it, and I will not prosecute anybody. Then in June, when the mask mandate came down, I was interviewed by Brian Malahy, and the very title of the article says, Riverton Mayor says mask mandate is heavy-handed, will not enforce. I said, we're not going to do it. If businesses want to have that as a requirement, so be it. If people want to wear one, go ahead. But I'm not going to use my police as the mask and social distancing police. Forget it. And was asked to do that. We kept Riverton open. I had people calling me that couldn't do things or events elsewhere that wanted to come to Riverton. We never had our city council meetings done via Zoom. They were always done in person. If people wanted to wear a mask, fine. But we always kept our city open. So those are a few of the things where I've demonstrated that backbone and that willingness to stand up to the establishment. We did it with ESG, with inappropriate materials in school, and pushing back on my Jordan School District, where my son and daughter go. It's unconscionable to me that they would have the level of pornography in the library. I never thought I'd see this day in Utah, guys. I really didn't. Unbelievable. And we had to stand up and push back on that. Stood up to high density housing. One of the very first things I did as a mayor. They wanted 10,000 homes on 900 acres at the mouth of Butterfield Canyon. That's insane. Absolutely insane, especially when all of our planning called for 3 units to the acre gross density. So I've tried to stand up to that, and this legislature, our state legislature, unfortunately, has been pushing down in the last 6 years under Brad Wilson 24 pieces of legislation that try to take away cities' land use authority. And you go talk to your city council members and mayors, and they're dealing with this. We've got to have people that will stand up, push back, and fight. And that's what I've done there. I was willing to call out the fact that ICE had designated Utah as a sanctuary state last May. Called that out in October. So these things I give as examples that I will go back and stand up and fight for you every day, as I've done in the last 10 years representing my community. And as far as my policy priorities go, my website, we've never changed it. It says, I want to champion 3 things as your senator: smaller government, safer families, and a stronger economy. Those 3 things. Smaller government, limited government, balanced budget. We absolutely need a balanced budget. I balance mine. I've been running my community this long every single year. And Washington, D.C. seems to think they're exempt from that. So that's critically important. The REINS Act, I agree. I've been saying this for 10 months. REINS, the REINS Act, to be able to rein in the federal government. We have to live under 100,000 pages of laws that are created by unelected bureaucrats. And these people aren't held accountable because they're unelected. And they go out and pass all this garbage. Taking an energy company public, having to deal with all that nonsense, being a mayor and having to hire 3 new people this year just to come into compliance with EPA and stormwater regulations come down from the federal government. It's absurd. Absolutely absurd. And as a mayor, I've been on the front lines, I've been saying, of pushing back on government overreach, not just federal, but sadly also state and county. So, smaller government, safer families, get rid of the Department of Education already. Let's stop talking about it. Second Amendment, inalienable right to protect ourselves and our families. And I say we need a separation, not between church and state. We need a separation between woke and state, and not fund these insidious programs. Stronger economy. And lastly, stronger economy. Energy is the base of our economy. We've got to get government out of the way. We are energy independent, dominant under Trump. We can do it again. We can have less than $2 a gallon gasoline again. We've got to get the federal government out of the way. They've got to get off and get the stewardship of our lands back to us, where they own 2/3 of it. And that is something that I want to really be able to work on. And as your senator, I'd ask to serve on 3 committees. Number 1, finance. Number 2, small business and entrepreneurship. And number 3, I want to ask to be on the natural resource committee, which encompasses public lands, and be able to really champion that initiative and finally drive that home. So thank you very much again for this time, and look forward to the questions.
All right, we'll jump into the question and answer portion. I don't know where you're most comfortable, Jason, maybe there, but we'll let him lead with the first few questions, and then we're going to open it up to delegates. How's everybody doing temperature-wise? Should we open the windows a little, or are we okay? Okay. If you start feeling warm, let us know. We'll open these wider. So, go you, Jason.
So, I think one of my big concerns is we see people run for office, and one of my frustrations that I've had for years is get in front of these candidates and they talk pro-life, pro-Second Amendment. I mean, they know all the talking points. And then when I finally have some one-on-one time, I start to ask them about the proper role of government. And I find very few understand the Constitution, the principles of the Constitution, where the authority of the federal government begins, where it ends. Would you each give us an example of a law that is currently, that we live under, that is unconstitutional? Start with you.
Do you care federal, state?
Either. This goal will start with Trent, and then the next one will start with you.
Well, I think that's a great question. I mean, this is something that people have asked me repeatedly. They're like, well, what's your understanding of the Constitution? How often do you read it? I said, I try to listen to it or read it at least weekly. And I had somebody ask me, well, what are the 5 protections that are guaranteed in the First Amendment? You know, freedom of religion, speech, right to assembly and peaceably petition the government for redress of grievances. And that is something he said, wow, I haven't had somebody even answer that correctly, not even ask Mitt Romney that question. So, where are examples of government overreach and unconstitutionality? I mean, I don't know how much time we've got here tonight.
I think he asked for one.
Pick one. Exactly.
This is just unbelievable. I mean, I think Mike Lee did a great job in championing just recently in the reauthorization of NDAA, 702 FISA. That's a horrible example of governmental overreach and something that's unconstitutional. How can we consciously, as senators, he's got an oversight responsibility. He's got Christopher Wray of the FBI right there that won't even answer his questions. Sir, you have 200,000 plus examples of spying, warrantless spying on Americans. How is that even good? What are your processes? How do we know what you're doing is actually not unconstitutional? He wouldn't answer the question. That's why he stood up so bravely on that issue and wouldn't vote yes for the NDAA, and I would have been a similar vote because of that.
We're going to try to make each answer under 2 minutes. I'll give those time.
Thank you. So I would say an agency regulation with the force of law, we can identify thousands of those. And I will tell you, the EPA regulations that are absolutely strangling our economy. I tell my friends, politicians all the time when they talk about all of these great things they've done to clean our air. I say my family has done more to clean our air than all the politicians in the world combined. My dad and his associates hold the patents on the catalytic converter. That kind of stuff drives all of the clean water and clean air that we would like when we have innovation, private investment, and government not directing where the grants ought to be going. Government needs to stay out. We can solve all the problems that we all care about if we allow the free markets to function.
And next question is, along the same lines, we see these great people run for office, great platforms, and then they get in office, I would say federal and state, and literally feels like within months they're part of the swamp, both here in Utah and in DC. That is one of my biggest concerns is we have people who run for office because they want to be politicians, and then they want to climb the power structure. How do we know what's going to prevent you from doing that? We'll start with you.
Yeah, I would say when you look at somebody's history, so, and I will, all due respect, Trent, there has been a history of going along with the establishment, including signing on to the MLB stadium. Before, I was talking to one of the legislators during the session, and he said to me, I'm not going into that meeting because they want us to pass a resolution on the MLB stadium. And he said, and I'm not interested. And I said, they're not asking for money, right? Knowing that that's going to come. He says, yeah, but. And I said, of course, but. They don't go to the state legislature and ask for approval unless they're going to come back and ask for money. We have to have people who understand that going along with the establishment is always going to end up, if you don't ask the right questions, end up in a place where it costs the taxpayer and it impinges on our freedom. And we had a whole lot of establishment politicians and some non-establishment politicians who got really fooled. And I don't care who was on there. What I do care, except for the fact that when we say that you fought the establishment, you were right there with the establishment, and now we're all on the hook for $2 billion to Gail Miller. So the way we do it is by looking at history. I was responsible for crafting the arguments and writing the white papers for the state legislature in 2015 to fight back against the growing effort to expand Obamacare in the state of Utah. It was Governor Herbert's #1 priority. He called it Healthy Utah, so it was no longer Obamacare. And the Senate going into that session had all the votes to pass it, and the House had almost all the votes to pass it. I stood firm that we had got massive pressure from not only the governor, but pressure from the press. Surprise, surprise to anybody. You do the right thing, and if you have a history, not only number one of doing the right thing, and number two, understanding how the establishment operates, because I cannot go back and be fooled by Mitch McConnell, because I get it. I know how these things work, and my history proves it.
We'll give you about 2.5 minutes, so you're on equal time there. Go ahead.
Oh, sure. Well, yeah, I get asked this question a lot. I think it goes back to look at what I've done, right? I've got a record. I think for the better part of 10, almost going on 11 years now in my community, go ask Riverton residents if they're happy with what I've done and how I have always stood up to the establishment and pushed back. I've given plenty of examples at my website. Go there at TrentStaggs.com. Take a look at that Proven Fighter page and see all the things that I've been talking about. That takes courage. I mean, it wasn't easy to be able to stand up in the midst of COVID. It wasn't just Salt Lake County Mayor Ginny Wilson and Democrats that were after me. There were a lot of Republicans and establishment folks that were too. And I said, no, we're going to stay open. We're going to do this. I got a lot of hate mail as a result. But hey, there were some voices out there still championing that, whether they're an elected office or not. Carolyn's organization was one of them. She recognized that. I was given an award by Freedom Front in 2022 for my stance on COVID in particular.
You did flip it. Thank you.
And there are people here that can attest to that. I mean, so that is something that I think is very important. And then secondly, it's not just what you've done, it's who you're going to surround yourself with. Because DC is very corruptible. And sadly, you're right. People that we've elected to go back there, and they're far too eager to ingratiate themselves in the culture of this DC establishment. That's the problem. That's why I've sought the endorsement of people like Carrie Lake and Senator Tommy Tuberville. They've given me. I'm the only one in this race with the endorsement of a sitting U.S. Senator. I've got over 100 local elected officials, mayors, city council members, county commissioners. They know that I'm that type of person. Those are the people I want to surround myself. So I've already built a bit of a natural coalition at home and also in D.C. with like-minded, liberty-loving, America First conservatives that I can go work with President Trump in January 25, day one.
This is my last question. We're going to turn it over to everybody. The border is obviously a massive problem. A lot of people saying we have an invasion on our hands. What's 7+ million people who've illegally come to the country. You get into office. What do you do now with this situation, with all these people who are already here, including potential terrorists? You're first.
Yeah, it's a very. I mean, this isn't rocket science. I mean, you close the border, you have a wall, you have Remain in Mexico, and you have E-Verify. And I tell you, if we did the E-Verify the right way, there would be so much self-deportation it wouldn't even be funny. You'd have a new wind instead of it going from west to east, from north to south. And sadly, our state legislature has been all too eager to make it a lot easier for illegal immigrants to be here. And they magnetize folks to come here with giving driver's licenses, in-state tuition. And most recently, just 2 years ago, this is something that Brad Wilson, as Speaker, championed and voted for and got through, is they gutted E-Verify. E-Verify, the law was put in back in 2010. I think it was sponsored by Chris Herod time, and they had to finally run it as a child identity protection bill because the establishment was so much after them saying, no, we can't have this, we can't have this. Because our children's IDs are being stolen was the only reason why they finally were able to get a narrative that would allow elected officials the courage to pass this thing. But it just went from 15. If you had more than 15 employees as an employer, you had to use E-Verify. They bumped it up to 150, which essentially exempts 80-90% of all businesses. And so when I talked and sat down in October of last year with the director of ICE, the Salt Lake City field office, and he explained all these things to me and why Utah is viewed so favorably amongst the illegal immigrant population because we don't deport and they're so friendly, that's a problem. But we have to be able to stand up. I mean, what I got from President after meeting with this field director was a statement that I put out saying, Governor Cox, President Adams, Speaker Wilson, do something. Please be like Texas. I don't ever want to be to the left of ICE. I got ICE telling me we're to the left of them. I mean, go out and do something, please. And their response was, we can't be the backstop to a failed federal immigration policy. Has it failed? Yes. But as was noted, the number one most important thing government can do is protect its citizens, whether it's me as a city with my police department, whether it's with the state or the federal government, and the state needs to step up and be able to help out with this issue.
So, absolutely, we have state government that has continually passed laws to accommodate illegal aliens here. I will say ICE was playing a big fat game last summer, and I know this because I met with the sheriffs at the time, and here's what was going down. The sheriffs are held to contracts that require, that federal contracts, that require them to provide, our county sheriffs, for illegal aliens. The ICE memo had zero to do with our state legislature. It had 100% to do with them trying to drag our sheriffs push them into a corner and twist their arm to comply with federal law that would harm all of us. Here's what they wanted. And so they released that memo to see who would bite and go after our sheriffs, and someone did. But here's what ICE was doing. Our sheriffs have to sign these contracts that allow illegal immigrants to have different ingress and egress at our prisons, which would require new facilities, by the way, which allow them to have a separate barber, different and better food than American citizens held in their jails, and also subjects our sheriffs and our counties to potentially massive lawsuits from activist organizations that love to sue the federal government. 3 of our sheriffs refused to comply. They've always been signing these, but under the Biden administration, Biden came in and said, guess what? We're going to hold you to these because they've waived the requirements in the past. 3 of our sheriffs said, we are not playing that game and putting our taxpayers on the hook and potentially needing to, how long? 15? Build new facilities. So they refused. ICE released a memo trying to put pressure on the sheriffs. And as soon as that brouhaha went down, I said, there must be something I don't know. And so I picked up the phone and called the sheriffs. We need people. And by the way, they rescinded their memo because they were dragged into a room where they had to answer for what they did. We need people who ask the questions before jumping on the social media bandwagon and going after the wrong people, which is what happened there.
You met with the sheriffs, you say. Did you meet with ICE? No, you didn't. ICE had a 2-hour meeting with me in my capacity as a mayor. Tons of crime at New Mountain View Village that I procured for our community. Yep. Foreign nationals, illegal immigrants. He shared with me the memo that he had designated as a sanctuary state. This is true. When I get into Congress, I'm going to change the laws because I think it's absurd that you have ICE detainees held to a much higher standard than American citizens. That is absurd. But at the end of the day, we need to be able to protect our citizens. And when I'm told that they are on average deporting 2 people a day from Utah County jails that have committed sexual assault on Utahns, that I find very unconscionable. So I sat on that meeting for 3 days. I did call state legislature. I asked the ICE individual too, and state legislators confirmed this. Yeah, they had talked to state officials. You know what their response was? We want to be viewed as a welcoming state. That's what their response was. And I said, you know what? This is going to take courage, and people are going to come after me, and they did. They put a hit piece out on me trying to claim that I was going after sheriffs when my statement said nothing about sheriffs. They know it all too well. I received a phone call from the governor's office within an hour of putting out my statement. And they said, we're going to go ahead and go after Staggs. That's exactly what they said. They said, we're going to get together and he's going to be sorry. He's going to be sorry he did this. So it takes a considerable amount of courage to stand up and be able to take on the establishment. And I've done it time and time again. I can give you a lot of other examples where I've stood up and within days, I have people come after me. I'm happy to do that.
Can I do one rebuttal? Because I did meet with local ICE officials. You got played by the establishment out of Washington, D.C. because the guy who released this memo is not a local ICE official. He is a regional
His name is Michael
official.
Bernanke. He's the Salt Lake City field officer. He works out of Salt Lake City.
He is regional. He is regional.
We're going to wrap this in
I
this
met
question.
with the local guys
We're
and
gonna
got the
wrap this.
lowdown
We're
from
gonna
the
wrap this.
local officials.
All right, so we're going to open up questions. Look, you guys this is your meeting. Any question you have, there's no questions off limits. Your job is to vet these people. Obviously, we're going to try to please keep your question brief. 30 seconds, not multiple questions, a single question, not a question within a question, and then we'll give each of them a minute and a half to answer. We'll start right here. We'll kind of work our way around. Right here. What's your name?
Josiah Teschner. So I'm an accountant by trade. I understand money. I understand numbers. The first thing that I'm really concerned about is the national debt, right? We're on track to do $1 trillion in interest. We're at $1.2 trillion in Social Security. We're about $1 trillion between Medicaid and Medicare. We're also at about $1 trillion for defense. So that's $4 trillion plus of expenses already on the board, right? All stuff that we have to spend money on, right? That doesn't include everything else, transportation, roads, blah, blah, blah. My question is how do you account for the $4 trillion that we're already taking in as income as a country, and how does that go out as a country now, according to you? Because the way it currently stands, there's no way to do that without either increasing taxes, reforming entitlements, or cutting defense.
It's a great question, and this is why I've actually issued a contract with Utah. I did it last October. There's 7 points to it. Number one is balanced budget amendment. I think that there is a lot that we need to do. There's a lot of places we can cut. I talked about the Department of Education. There's $80 billion right there. I talked about in previous town halls. I mean, even with the Department of Defense, I went back to D.C. and I signed the tax pledge. Right, I'm not going to raise taxes, and sat down with Grover Norquist. And in that communication, he said, Trent, there's over 200,000 employees at the DOD that work in a clerical nature that we could get rid of and have zero impact to national security. I said, why hasn't anybody pushed that? It's like, welcome to the swamp, right? Well, that's something that I would bring up. And I said, we need to be able to change the language. We need to beat the liberals at their own game. And instead of calling it a reduction in the DOD force, we need to be able to say that it would be this would actually become the Northern Virginia Home Affordability Act. We would actually get something done. There's a lot of agencies that could be cut that are duplicative. This is where my experience comes into play. I was able to get us out of a county-led law enforcement agency, take it to the city, where I've cut taxes and we've saved millions and millions of dollars. If the government should be doing it, the federal government that is, if it's in Article 1, Section 8, great. If not, and if government should do it, local government is what does best, and we need to go through the whole list of agencies.
So I'm going to clarify. I named 4 things, okay? Debt, payments, Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, and defense. How do you cut enough out of any of those 4 to fund everything else that we need? Because $60 billion, no offense, not going to cut it. Go ahead.
Why do you have to be a numbers guy, man?
I know, right?
Numbers care about reality, which too many of our elected officials are cool ignoring. So I will say that we have to reform entitlements while still providing, it has to be done on a glide path, right? We have to still provide those who are nearing retirement age, who have been promised things like Social Security, that they will still have that while reforming things as we go down in age, so that those younger people have the opportunity to adequately prepare for the realities, because numbers don't really care what you want. They are just reality. I will tell you, Obamacare and what we did with the massive expansion of healthcare entitlements was destructive, not only at a federal level, not only at a state level, but also on a personal level. I think all of us have seen, if we pay for our own health insurance, what has happened as a result. That's something I think most people could get behind if we can reform it in a way that people don't feel like their ability to receive health care will be stripped from them. And it can be done. So I do not have a lot of time, but I'll tell you, those two areas can be reformed and are a massive piece of our debt. We can also, when it comes to defense, am I done? When it comes to defense, there are ways that we can trim up the amount we're spending without reducing the quality of what we're getting at all.
Next question. My name is Nathan Rex. I'm a state delegate from West Jordan. You both have talked about term limits. Please explain to me how term limits will not empower the unelected bureaucracy in the federal government.
Yeah, and I didn't talk about term limits, but that is, I'm telling you, that's massive. Can I give you one super quick story? When I was working up at the state legislature, it was Eric Hutchings was chairing a committee on law enforcement. And I go in there, I had to be in there for something, and there's this discussion with Salt Lake County. Eric had been at the state legislature like 16 years at the time. A few years prior, there had been some discussions about where you house, it was when the Operation Rio Grande and reforming things. One of the problems that we had with homelessness was people could shoot up right in front of the cop and they would not be held, right? They'd be let go because there was no jail space. So it was like pulling teeth to get the county to open up some jail beds. There were big negotiations that went on with that. And we're sitting in this hearing. It's like a couple of years later, most of the people on the committee were new legislators, and there were bureaucrats who were before them testifying from the county. And I texted Eric, in fact, during this, because he was chair of the committee, and he was going after the bureaucrats. And I'm like, dude, you're being a jerk. Well, turns out, the longer I waited, the more I realized they were lying to him. They had completely double-dipped money-wise, and they expected that the elected officials who were new would not know what those agreements were. They were the bureaucrats, and they figured they could just wait out the elected officials. That's massive. I would agree with it if we have reform of our bureaucracy, and I love Vivek's suggestion, which is in 8 years in the federal government. We have to deal with that. Absolutely.
Well, I signed the term limit pledge. That's 2 for Senate, 3 for House. And I believe that, we have to get to this place where people get back to the concept of service. And so that is what's really important to me. I'm self-imposing one here as a mayor. And so that is a problem with the unelected bureaucracy that's there. Somebody at a town hall suggested that I go in there day one, hire all new staff that can look at it with a fresh set of eyes so we know where all the problems lie and how we can actually recommend changes to the system. But Kash Patel wrote a book called Government Gangsters. Kash is amazing. He's endorsed my campaign. He's come out here a couple of times. And he has a lot of great ideas to take on the deep state and unelected bureaucrats. And I'm telling you, so many of them, it's sad. It's a sad reality that the deep state does exist. And there are people there that their job is supposed to work for the elected officials that we, the people, vote for and put in place, and they don't. They're there for their own interests, and they'll wait people out, right? So we need to have that kind of level of reform to go hand in hand with term limits, I believe.
Hi, Peter Gilbert from Pleasant Grove, state delegate. I have served in the Utah National Guard for 12 years. All of us that have deployed in combat since 1945 have done so unconstitutionally. I hope that you will repeal the 4 open AUMFs. I've been working on a local issue to try and repeal unconstitutional wars or try and end unconstitutional wars. I think we can all see the results of those in our country, especially the last 30 years. I've been working on an issue on the state level, Defend the Guard, where it simply says the Utah National Guard will not deploy into combat unless Congress declares war. Pretty simple. Seems pretty easy.
Seems simple.
The state legislature won't budge on it. The Pentagon comes, any state that has presented this is being presented across the country. Any state that presents it, the Pentagon sends 2-star generals to threaten them with defunding their guard completely. I know Congress is supposed to control the purse strings, not the Pentagon. Will you defend the Utah National Guard from the state level and give courage to the state legislature?
Quick. By the way, 72% of our guards budget comes from the federal government. Just keep that in mind as you do your answers. Again, numbers, guys. Sorry.
Trent.
The short answer is yes. And I've really admired Senator Lee's strength here, where he has been calling out time and time again the unconstitutional use of presidential authorizations like that of use of force, military force. It isn't constitutional, plain and simple. And we need more people. That's how we ultimately change it. And Mike Lee was at a town hall, and I heard him say that. How do we make those changes? You need more people like him that are going to stand up. And I had somebody at a town. It was actually on Saturday at the event at Mountain View High School. And he said, "Will you stand at the gates of hell, right, with Mike Lee on these types of issues?" The answer is yes. We just need more. And I truly believe that courage is contagious. That we have a very important opportunity in 2024 here to get President Trump back in office and have a whole cadre of America First senators to go back there, have his back, and be able to push forward this agenda. And you're going to see it change. And that's why I've stood up. I called out the other month. I called for Mitch McConnell to step down. I said I'm a quick no vote on McConnell. And it even put that on the largest platform I could find as a candidate through national media, and asked other candidates in this race to sign on and commit to that. Because we need change. We need change all the way across the board to include our own Republican caucus in the Senate.
Yeah, so let me give you an example. A couple of years ago, I met with somebody from the governor's office and said, I have a lot of people calling me who are in the National Guard and very concerned about the unconstitutional vaccine mandate that is being imposed on them, and they only have a couple weeks left. And you know what I was told? I thought it was higher. I swear they told me it was 90-some%. So 72% comes from the federal government. Right after they'd given me a rundown of all these great things that we were going to do with all this extra money that the federal government was shipping to us, I asked this question, and I was told, oh, well, you know what? They pay for 72% of our National Guard budget, so there's nothing we can do. And my response was, wait a minute, you just told me that we have like $5 billion extra dollars. I think you can cover it, right? We had Texas and Florida at that time, and I think a few others who were standing up. And I was told, you know what, that money's all spoken for, infrastructure. And my response was, we have the bodily autonomy of individuals who are serving our nation. And your concern is budget when we don't have a budget issue, and infrastructure. Not good enough. I have always fought on these types of issues and will continue to do so in the Senate.
Adona Guinness from Saratoga Springs, State Delegate. This might just be a general question. I hope that you can answer it. And I know that someone over here, maybe you or the accountant, because I'm back there. A lot of the numbers that we're talking about, right, come from illegal immigration. I'm completely against it. I know you are too. Who at the state level would you endorse that will help us here with ICE? With our sheriffs, that we don't become a sanctuary. Who do you endorse? And who are you going to vote for governor?
Yeah, we're starting with you.
Yeah, Phil Lyman. I'm a good friend of Phil's. We've worked on a lot of things. Phil Lyman. Yep, I trust him explicitly. Yeah, and he trusts me explicitly, by the way.
Well, I think it's not just the governor that's important. Phil Lyman.
No, I know. I want to know who your state people are that you want to endorse. They're going to help us here.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think Phil and I have done a town hall. I'm very supportive of Phil. I think he would do a phenomenal job because of all the experience he's got in the legislature. I mean, he's been there for 10 plus years. I think at least.
I think
and
it's
he's been a fighter. He's been a fighter. I think Carson I'm friendly with as well. And I think he's a great individual. He's somebody who's kind of from the outside as well, and I think he would stand up. I've not endorsed anybody in the race, but because of the experience that Phil has in the legislature, I really like that. I think the Attorney General is important. We've seen this in Texas, right? So it's not just Governor Abbott, it's been Ken Paxton. And Ken Paxton being able to stand up and fight for that. And look at what has happened as a result. I mean, him being impeached by the establishment swamp in Texas, for crying out loud. So I think we have an opportunity, and I'm not as educated on the candidates for the Attorney General race right now, but I know with Rachel Terry, Frank Mylar, and also Trent Christensen, I've talked to all of them, and I believe that the legal experience that they have and just the type of individuals they would stand up also and be able to push back on ICE and get this state back in the direction we need.
Yes.
My name's Tom Wadley. I'm a state delegate from Harriman. And I have something that doesn't show up on any of the literature that I've been looking at. I'm trying to learn what the candidates do, where they stand. And this has to do with the general tone of a toxic environment that we have in Congress, and also in the broader sense in our general population, where people feel it's okay to demean others, to attack them, to be abusive in their language, to be intimidating. I just feel like you folks are going to be in leadership positions, and I think leaders can kind of set the tone a bit for the general public, so we know that in Utah we don't do that. We don't even do that in America. And so, and for an example, you talked about Senator Romney, and I didn't know about all these things that you said. Well, I'm glad you informed me, but he has to go to extreme measures to protect his family from violence, himself and his family, and I don't think that's right. And I'm wondering what you guys can do when you become senators, right, to somehow change the direction we're going.
So for those of you here, he's saying, what can we do to have more stability in our country, with our senators, right? What?
I needed to show stability to you, Jason.
All right, whose turn is it?
I think it's your turn.
Hey, I think, Tom, thank you for the question. Look, I've told people time and time again, I'm not going back to D.C. to make friends. I'm going to make change. I've said it from the very beginning in my launch video. And I said, look, every time we compromise, it costs us trillions of dollars. And so sadly, and it's been mostly Mitch McConnell and Republican leadership that have sold us out. And I talked about that in my speech at CPAC. I was invited to go speak at CPAC. And I said, we need leaders that are going to fight for everyday Americans. Enough of this. And so, but I think, look, you don't compromise on principle. At least I wouldn't. We need to get the debt under control, these numbers, guys that have asked questions. And so I want to get back to pre-COVID spending levels, for crying out loud. That's going to put us in a great trajectory in terms of finally getting back to fiscal sanity. How we do that, I might be able to sit down and, compromise or collaborate with people on how we do that. But the ultimate goal and the principle of how of attaining that, you can't negotiate on, because we've been negotiating ourselves away for far too long.
I think what I was referring to in a BYU devotional I was listening to, they said, can we disagree but not do it disagreeably? I think your point, sticking to your principles, is key. But what I'm looking for is, can we tone it down so we're not hating each other? That's all.
What's the time? Yeah. So I agree. Here's the thing. Nobody who has ever worked with me in politics, or any of my 5 sons or my husband who's standing over there, would say that I'm somebody who will back down when I'm standing on truth. But to your point, we don't have to scream dirty names at people, right? And when I'll tell you, I worked on some legislation this past year, and it had to do with election integrity. And I knew that there would be massive pushback from people who don't want to disclose data and who think that our elections are fine. So what did I do? I found ways to work with people who don't agree with me by talking about the data security aspect. So when we can use our minds and when we can interact with people in a constructive way, pointing out facts and truth. We need to point out facts and truth. That's the only way people can sort through all the garbage out there and get to where we need to be. but it doesn't have to be done in a way where we're calling people names. On the other hand, I will say that in this state, the people who are behind hashtag disagree better, those who tout that are the nastiest people I know. And that's all cool. So what I'm saying is, I agree with you. I just think that sometimes there are efforts to cow people by using phrases that the people speaking them don't adhere to. Truly, the nastiest people I know behind closed doors talk about hashtag disagree better. But I agree with you.
Well, let's go right here and then right there. Okay? Yes, sir.
Steve Austin, I'm going to buck the train. I'm not going to stand up. Steve Austin, state delegate. I'm also Bluffdale City Council member. My wife is actually a director at a charter school here in Utah. And I cannot tell you how many times she has come home and just complained about the restrictions that the federal government has put on her, which actually ends up costing our educators more money. It ties their hands. Now, Trent, you've talked about a little bit about wanting to get rid of the education department on the federal level. Now we're gonna talk about actuals here. You guys, whoever makes it in there is going to be one out of over 200 senators. So you're going to have a lot to do to convince people. But I want to know specifics of how you want to go about removing restrictions that the federal government puts on our educators.
Carolyn?
Oh, specifics about how we
I
remove
don't want
those
just in general. I don't want the federal government.
I will tell you this. I think the best way we start down that path is doing something that the federal government, and no government ever does. We have instituted some of this in the state, and that is, how about we do an evaluation of, since the Department of Education, and we can look at specific metrics that they've placed on the education community, and how about we do an analysis on what the impact has been, what the cost-benefit analysis, Some numbers, guys, come on. So let's take a look at what the cost has been, and let's take a look at what the return has been. And if we can do that, we can get to the bottom of where a lot of these problems are. Because if you look at trend lines when it comes to spending out of the federal government and performance, there is an inverse relationship, right? But unless we analyze these things, and we don't analyze things, government does not analyze things. Until we analyze things, we won't know where we ought to be stripping back if we're going to start slowly. I think I call this time the golden moment, and I'll talk about that more later, but I do think more and more people are realizing that it's time for real change, and there may actually be the will to do what we've been talking about doing for 40 years by just getting rid of the Department of Ed.
Trent?
Great question. And I think getting rid of the Department of Education is going to be a huge, huge benefit to Utah, to parents. And I say that on my website. Parental control isn't priority A, it's priorities A through Z. And I've got state school board members that has endorsed my candidacy. And they've informed me that around 7% or so of our state education budget comes from federal dollars. Yet they control everything, to your point. I mean, the compliance costs alone that you point out, just with Title I and others, these federal mandates, just the compliance costs are more, I think, than the money we're getting from the federal government. So we should absolutely cut that string, be done with it. I mean, this is something the Department of Education that was instituted under the Jimmy Carter years. Every Republican's talked about it. Let's stop talking about it and finally get it done. And if it takes a Tommy Tuberville moment to do that and just stand on ceremony and finally get it done, let's do it so that the control is with the parents and local.
My name is Kathleen Clark, and I'm escaping from California. I'm nobody and not a delegate. I just trying to learn. But I think I know Trent stands on this, but can you tell me, Carolyn, what you think about Donald Trump?
Yeah, so I am a supporter of Donald Trump. He did what nobody else has done in a number of different ways, who has led our country in, I would say, decades. We have a massive threat from China. Donald Trump exposed that. we have a Supreme Court that for the first time in decades, actually the majority is willing to look at the Constitution and make decisions based on what the founders intended when they wrote that document. I'll tell you, when I was working for Mike Lee and I was talking to people who deal in the extractive industries around this state, everybody had a plan that they were putting in place just in case Donald Trump won that last election, because everybody knew that there would be attempts to shut down energy and those industries in our state. He has done more than I have seen a president do in a really long time to start to turn the tide for the United States. And even though I don't like his dirty words sometimes, if you cannot meet constitutional muster when it comes to your policies, I'm not even going to get to the rest of it. We need a president who supports the Constitution and will push forward constitutional principles.
Jessica, may I just add one thing to her comment?
Sure.
One of the best things Donald Trump has done is to peel off the veil of the Democrats.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Trent, we know where you stand. You want to take just 30 seconds?
I can. So Carol, do you endorse President Trump?
I already did months ago. By the way, I'm the only candidate
that's
in this
good.
race
That's
who was in Washington
All right,
in
next
December of
question.
2020 in
Right
support
here.
of Donald Trump.
Okay, next question.
No, I'll answer that then. I'll expand on it. I mean, I was the very first one to endorse President Trump in this race. And I did it because we need his strength back in Washington, D.C. It's the policies, yes. I love the 2017 tax cuts. I love the less than $2 gallon gasoline. I like the foreign policy. We wouldn't have the problems in Ukraine and Israel, I believe, if Trump were in office today. We wouldn't have the But a more personal example to me was that of Josh Holt, and I said this in my CPAC speech as well. I have a Riverton resident that was imprisoned in that socialistic country for over 18 months, starting back in 2016. He went there, he married a Venezuelan woman, thrown in jail on totally fabricated charges, right? And the Obama administration and Biden as vice president, they did absolutely nothing. I'm hearing from the mother constantly, just in tears, how do we get my boy home? And it was President Trump that brought him home. And that's why I endorsed him wholeheartedly and said, without equivocation, we need him back, and we need senators that have the America First vision too that can support him. As Kash Patel said, he's come out to support me. He said, look, it's not enough that we get him back in office, because we saw what happened with Mitt Romney. He wouldn't support on the border wall. He votes with Biden 60% of the time. I mean, heck, he still today says that he would support Biden over Trump. What world is he living in? We got to have people that know what time it is, and Trump understands it.
My name's Ken Colmone. I'm a state delegate from Saratoga Springs right here. I'd like to ask a couple of questions.
One question, please.
You're going to like these two questions.
All right.
What is a 15-minute city?
Oh, I do like
Is it good or bad? And why?
I think
let's
it's
see.
your,
You go first.
Yeah.
Listen, this is something, it's bad, first of all. It's bad. A 15-minute city is something that the World Economic Forum and other globalists have envisioned, that they want everybody to be in this nice little situation. They're within 15 minutes of all the daily necessities. They own nothing, right? They want you to own nothing and be happy. So it's horrible. It's a horrible situation. And this is something I've been fighting for day one. In 2018, as mayor, again, the Olympia Hills development wanted 10,000 homes on 900 acres at the mouth of Butterfield Canyon. When I found out that about 70% of that product type was 21 plus unit to the acre apartments, I said, this is absurd. Nobody's going to own anything. How are they going to attain the American dream and have equity, right? They can't do it. And sadly, we're seeing that play out even further today by our state legislature that's dominated by developer interests. And they allow Wall Street landlords, which we as a city tried to pass something that says regulate that use, that you can't do that, because the Utah Association of Realtors has guesstimated that some 16 to 20+% of all the single family housing units are owned or controlled by corporate interests. Even in my own city, they put up a new gated community of some 300 plus units. They're all for rent. Why are we doing this? It's exacerbating this housing crisis they just keep wanting to throw. We have a housing shortage. Well, fix the illegal immigration situation. Don't allow Wall Street landlords, right? And we will fix the problem. I also think the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity is a problem. They're importing tens of thousands of people from outside the state every single year that are of immediate home buying age. Many of them have equity far exceeds any of our residents, and they can outbid Utahns. They want to put out this narrative that's false, that says it's our kids and we need a place for our kids. I've been hearing that for 7 years now as a mayor, and it's not true. The last decade, most of it now is in net migration and people of immediate home buying years. Even if it was our kids, they're 25, 30 years to get into the housing market. It's a big problem here in the state of Utah, and that's 15-minute cities are bad.
So I would like to know, when you ran for mayor in Salt Lake County mayor in 2020, why you said we have a housing crisis and the county needs to take a look at all of the zoning laws in every community so that we can deal with the housing crisis. It was on your website. I will tell you, when I have met with local officials and they talk about NIMBYism, my response always is, do you all know what NIMBYism is? Not in my backyard. And it's used as a derogatory term. And my response always is, could you please tell me the difference between NIMBYism and self-determination for a community? Because communities ought to be able to decide what they want to look like and how they're going to grow. So not only should the state not be pushing down on them, nor should the county. And if we think we're going to deal with our housing crisis, which is a whole other discussion, which I'd be happy to have outside of this, well, if you ask more questions, not only do we need to fight back on that, but it is not the role of any level of government outside of cities and towns to determine how they grow, what their lot sizes are going to be. It shouldn't be coming from the state, and it should not be coming from the county in place of the state. And I never would have supported that. And 15-minute cities, yes, are unequivocally bad. It takes out of the hands of the local community the ability to plan for themselves.
Oh, and then, no, she was next. Boom, boom, and then there.
My name is Monica Barlow. I'm a county delegate, but most importantly, a mom. And I have a huge problem with the way this country is going and the fear I have for my children. And you guys are parents, and I hope you understand. I watch things like BLM. I watch people get out of jail that should not be getting out of jail. Just recently, the illegal immigrant that killed Lakin. I want to know more on your stance. You mentioned ICE, and having them naturally leave the country. I don't want to just have them naturally leave the country. I support Trump's idea of actually getting them out of the country. I want to hear more your stance on safety and the law being enforced in this country.
Yes.
I'll see who's
I'm first.
Okay.
So I was down at the border a year ago. We have someone in this race who discovered a month ago that it's a problem down there. And I will tell you, by the way, this was pointed out when I was there. I was meeting with agents at the border, and one of the things that was pointed out is that Trump's wall actually is huge, and it is bigger and more beautiful than the other walls, and literally it is. It is substantially taller and more difficult to scale. We have agents at the border who are spending 90% of their time meeting the humanitarian needs of the women and children who are being raped and trafficked, by the way, right? All incentivized by the Biden administration. We need to deport. Right now, we have 6.2 million illegal aliens who have been picked up by ICE and released back into the community. And historically, I can't think of what that's called when they're picked up and released. Historically, that has been 80% dangerous criminals. We have 6.2 million right now. And we know that we have substantially more than the 7 million that came in. And we have historically, they've been saying 12 million are here. We've been hearing that same number for 20 years. We must deport. We have no other option. And we have to have a Congress that is willing to fund the deportation, to stand up strong against a media like I've done repeatedly in my career in politics, to stand up strong against a media that's going to throw out all of these, you're racist, you hate these people, whatever. We have to do the right thing. I, like you, am a mother of children who need to have something better than what we're leaving them right now.
Trent?
Yeah.
Before I answer that, let me address, I guess, an implication that was thrown my way that somehow the county. Look, I fought the county. In 2018, it was the county because it was an unincorporated county, this Olympia Hills development. I fought like heck to end up ultimately about having the original density that was there. So I think it's unfortunate that as conservatives we just snipe at each other. And I've seen this happen now, and making reference to a 2020 Salt Lake County mayoral election and stale, messaging from a 2020 campaign. Getting back to your comment about civility, the only people that win when conservatives sit here and snipe at each other are the establishment squishes in this race.
So
we should be focused on and put our fire at John Curtis and Brad Wilson. I don't know why we're doing this, and that's why as conservatives we get people that win elections. We have great people that we put out of our convention system, but because of this infighting and we end up with the establishment squishes in various races. So I, for one, am not going to subscribe to that. And I think we need to have a discussion on what our policies are. And with respect to this, that's why I took it so seriously when the Salt Lake City field office director that is in Salt Lake City met with me for 2 hours with my police chief and with my communications director. We found out that some 70% of people that could have been apprehended and stayed here were released. And so they felt like there were so many that could have been, so many of these crimes that could have been prevented. And as a husband, as a father, when I hear that 2 people a day are being sexually assaulted by illegal immigrants here, I sat on that news for 3 days. And I spoke to my wife, and I just thought, you know what? I got to say something. Even in the capacity as a mayor, in which I met with this individual, I've got a platform. I should say something, and I did it. And I've been attacked as a result. But that's what we need, is people that are going to go out and do that. And I support that the Trump agenda. I know he's putting out a plan with respect to deportation. It's going to be a huge challenge. That's why I'm hopeful if we vigorously enforce E-Verify, we could have a good chunk already leave, but absolutely we need to be able to go through and do that.
Because that is offensive to say that stating facts is sniping. And sorry, but I'm not your daughter. And earlier you told me that you were very disappointed that I brought up facts about your policies. You're talking about something that occurred in 2018 and telling me that 2020 is dated. If you, when running for Salt Lake County mayor, put out a plan that is violative of cities' ability to plan appropriately and feeds right into the hands of the World Economic Forum because you didn't understand what it meant, that is something that those of us who are making these decisions and weighing who's going to be the one who's going to get it in Washington need to know. And it is, to call it sniping is absolutely diminutive. It's as though you are the one with the information, and anybody who puts out counter information is a little woman who should shut them out. No, I'm not.
Guys, I'm sorry. This is the type of putting words in my mouth thing. That's what I'm disappointed about. I didn't say those comments that you just said, Carolyn. That's offensive for you to think that I would characterize you some way like you just said. No, I don't question your conservative bona fides. You shouldn't question mine. You gave me an award.
You have I gave you an award
You know
1
what?
year later because
This
I'm
is
just
Carolyn,
you did the right
This
thing.
is what happens when people get into trouble in a campaign and they will say or do anything to try to claw their way back.
Oh,
We're going to turn it to the next question. What's your question? Next question.
And hey, I'll just say, you're entitled to your own opinions, but not your own facts. There's no facts.
What's that?
Here's your
Okay. Yes.
All right. So my name's Jensen Bassick. I'm a state delegate from Sandy. As of right now, I'm pretty sure I'd be fine with either one of you winning convention and becoming my senator. But my question is, after convention, how are you going to win the primary against someone like John Curtis specifically? That's what I'm worried about.
All right, Mike.
Well, just that's a great question, and I think it speaks to viability. And unfortunately, yeah, we as state delegates have put people that have won the convention, but they haven't been able to win in the primary. And I tell you what, we're in a great position to do that. Not only I've got more endorsements than anybody in this race. I had Cash Patel introduce me at a fundraising event at Mar-a-Lago. I mean, we have raised and received in our campaign over $1 million, and we have the ability to take on the establishment in the primary. And guys, it's going to be expensive. Unfortunately, because of SB 54, sadly, this is going to be a very expensive undertaking. I think it's at least a $3 million race. And you have people in the race that have millions of dollars already and are starting that way. And so, look, I think that we are going to be able, with a strong convention win, and with all the support of the state delegates, if people can galvanize around a true conservative, the conservative in this race, then we can win convincingly at convention. We've got the resources then to go up and compete against someone like John Curtis and Brad Wilson, and we'll be able to do it effectively.
Carolyn?
Yeah. So the way we do it is by having a good, strong candidate who can differentiate themselves by never being a part of the establishment. And I will tell you, I think SB 54, we're 10 years in, and we have a whole lot of self-funders who looked at it this year, and too many self-funders for their good, perfect for the convention candidate. And that is exactly the opportunity that we have this year. But we have to have somebody who has been in the trenches fighting the fight, or it is going to be very easy to take them out with all that money. And if we are just one more politician that's on the stage with all the other politicians, the big money's going to win every time. I am the non-politician who can make it out of convention with 60+% and be the convention nominee and the party nominee.
Tiffany.
Yeah, thank you. Tiffany Barker, precinct chair. So we use the word establishment, right? It's kind of like a general, broad term that everyone's trying to figure out who is and who isn't. I feel like our conservative legislators are very much establishment. I've lost a lot of faith in a lot of our legislators. What have you done specifically to, I want to say, piss them off, to make them mad? What have you done that's, do you know what I'm saying?
Challenge them,
Challenge them, not the Democrats, that's easy, but the conservatives. What have you done to stand up against the conservative legislators?
Yeah. So I'll tell you what I've done to accomplish the right things, right? I have a friend, it's not Jason. I mean, not that Jason's not a friend, but a friend who has a conservative podcast. And he said to me, Carolyn, are you going to use this specific language? And I said, I'm not going to use that specific language, and I'll tell you why. Because I need to make sure that some bills pass that are good bills, and I'm going to use language that can get those bills passed. So I don't do anything that I do to tick people off. I do what I do to accomplish the right thing. And if that ticks people off in the process, so be it. But I'm not there to poke people, because that would undermine my ability to pass and affect really good, positive, conservative legislation for everyone in this room. So that's the same way I plan to handle things in the Senate. And it is what my history has shown. I'll give you an example. ESG. Freedom Front, the organization that I was running, our very first priority as a new organization was pushing back against ESG. If you don't know what that is, Jason's not going to give me extra time. I'll talk to you about it afterward. But it is basically controls through our banking system that control behavior. It's basically a social credit score through the banking system. So nobody was talking about it in the state. In January of 2022, we were a brand new organization. There were 2 bills that would have dealt with it that year, one on energy, one on social credit scores. What? And those got shut down. So what did I do? I didn't rail on people. I led a working group with the AG's office, Sean Reyes, with Marlo Oakes of the Treasurer's office, and with state legislators and business executives to come up with ways we weren't going to get through the wall. How do we get around it? There were 7 bills and resolutions passed in 2023. I got the job done.
Well, I think if you take a look at any of the things that I put on my website there, Proven Fighter, it's been pushing up against the establishment. And in the state in particular, I mean, I'm probably the most marked wanted person with respect to being in elected office locally, because I've always stood up. And, you know, the high density housing situation is one of those times where I've done it repeatedly. And our city council was the first. I don't know if you're aware, but in November, the legislative general auditor for the state legislative general auditor's report, they put out a report on housing policy, right? And they always do this at the state legislature. And they'll say, hey, all right, we need to have, one of the recommendations that came out of that was, we need to be more like California. We need, go take a look at it. They said, we need top-down housing targets. And I said, you're insane. And so my city council passed a resolution straight away and said, no, we actually are calling out this report for the garbage that it is, and we call on our state legislature not to support it. And the conversation changed. They used that legislative auditor's office to go ahead and try to advance the things they want. And I'm standing in their way constantly. And for the last going on 7 years now as mayor, I told you under Brad Wilson's speakership, we've seen 24 pieces of legislation that have come out undermining city's land use authority. And a lot of them started out really bad. But we've gotten involved, and we're now, I think, changing the tide. There's been a lot of cities that have modeled their resolution and taken ours that Riverton has led out on.
All right, we're about 12 minutes till 9, so we've got a few more. Okay, right here, and then we'll try to get as many as we can. Okay, right here.
Okay, Shauna Fuller, I'm a state delegate. There seems to be a never-ending request for money for Ukraine, and whether it's diversion from other things that are going on. At first, we weren't going to send any of our people there. We weren't going to send any of our stuff. We weren't going to provide our certain kinds of jets. I'm wondering where you stand on funding for Ukraine, and is there an end?
I guess I'm that one first. Yeah, from the very beginning, I said I don't support funding endless war. I just don't. You know, the $130 billion or so that American taxpayers have already sent to Ukraine, I think is absurd. I think, you know, to have $6 billion accounting errors is also just unjustifiable. We could have finished the wall with that amount of money. And so this is not something that we can continue. We just can't. I think it's very, very unfortunate that we have such a weak leader in Joe Biden, that he will admit new members of NATO, like Finland, that don't even pay their fair share. Right? And that was something that President Trump did so successfully. He was able to finally force Europe to pay, they're supposed to pay 2% of their GDP into NATO, right, for protection. And here we are 80 years plus post-World War II, almost, and we're paying, we continue to pay the American taxpayer for all this. So NATO needs to be able to stand up on its own, and they need to be able to defend their own backyard. And so, no, we can't continue down this road. That's just, we have some 750 military bases in the world. We can't continue to do that. We're fighting wars that aren't even, you know, constitutional. So this is a big, big problem. And one of the ways in which you solve it, as part of my contract with Utah, put a 10-year ban. 10-year ban on any exiting member of Congress or high-ranking government official from ever becoming a lobbyist or becoming working for a defense contractor.
Yes. The industry that thrives off of endless war is a problem. I have a friend who actually used to work for Orrin Hatch, and I asked him, he works for Mike Lee now, and I said, tell me, is that like a real thing, the military-industrial complex? He laughed. This was years ago before it became so evident. I will tell you, Ukraine, do you know what the average age of a soldier, last report I saw in Ukraine is? 45. It's now 52. Yes, 52. And early on, our nation, this administration, stated that their purpose in Ukraine was not reestablishment of the Ukrainian border. It was regime change in Russia. Now, Putin is not a good guy. I don't think anyone in this room would argue that he is. But if we are attempting regime change and we're stacking up the bodies of dead Ukrainian men and destroying their homes and families in the process, I don't think that's the right trade-off. And no, I will not support that. Have not ever supported that. And we need to get back to Congress declaring war on any wars that we're involved in, because we all know there are boots on the ground there, and there have been for quite a period, and we're still kind of denying it. But we have no idea where this money is going, what it's doing, but we do know that they're kidnapping men off the street, and we know that up to 2 million Ukrainians have gotten out of the country because they're not interested in fighting this war either.
Okay, right here. Brian Johnson from here in Saratoga Springs. What specific things can you do to not just decrease inflation, as Biden would say, but actually decrease inflation, get back to prices that are reasonable?
So there are two things. Here's the thing. If you do anything too quickly, you're going to see a massive shrinking of the GDP, and people will be hurting even worse. So what we need to do is get rid of the regulatory regime that is strangling private business, allow economic growth, and allow ourselves to grow out of this while stopping the constant influx of newly created dollars into the economy. So I think you have to do those two things, but if we try doing it quickly, we'll end up with people in even bigger pain. I'm going to say one thing that is potentially pretty problematic, and that is right now with what's going on in the Middle East, the fighting that we have with the Houthis. Chris, oh my gosh, now I can't think of his name, who just left Congress. Stewart, yes, recently said that if we have the Straits of Hormuz shut down, that we will experience a 9% GDP, estimates are a 9% shrinkage in our GDP. The Great Depression was 7%. So, and then I was talking to a military expert today about some of this, and he said, I've missed the news. You know, there is escalating fighting in that region, massive increase in costs because ships are now going around Africa. So we have a lot of things. It was created by the money printing, and it's exacerbated by the international problems. And it goes to your question, Shauna. Pull back the wars, the many wars.
Great question, Ryan. And, 3 things. Number 1, stop the printing press. Stop printing money. That's why I want a balanced budget amendment. Number 2, energy. Energy is the base of our economy. If we have increasing energy costs, everything else is going to be more expensive. It'll trickle its way all the way through the economy. I understand that. Haven't taken an energy company public. We need energy. We need superabundance of energy. I don't subscribe to climate alarmism. I would never chair a climate caucus. Thank you very much. We need to have more energy here. Drill, baby, drill. We need to have nuclear energy, all sources to be able to get to a point where we stop this crazy inflation. The other thing I'll say is, getting back to that RAINS Act, that's incredibly important. They estimate that it's about a $4 trillion drag on our economy. All the regulation. It's crazy. Those that own businesses, they say it costs between $10,000 to $20,000 per employee just to come into compliance with all the nonsense. You know, what do you think would happen if we got rid of all that regulation? That's why I've been saying for 10 months campaigning, we need the REINS Act, we need to take a chainsaw to regulation. And so those three things I think would help the situation immensely.
Right here.
Helen Robson, Saratoga, we just switched, 403. Okay, my question has to do with my kids and all of our kids. They came home from school 2 weeks ago. They're really struggling to get their grades up. And some of the reasons why is because they can't get their assignments done in school because the teachers are too busy using their Google Translator to talk to the kids who don't know English. And so they're not getting anything done. They don't have any help. And this is going on in their Spanish immersion class where they're throwing all the Spanish-speaking kids. And so then they just talk and visit with the teacher, and then my kids don't get any help. And then the English teacher is the other stuff. So I actually am in a school community council and a district community council member. I asked about this. I even talked to the principal at the SEC meeting today. And I threw this out to him, and I said, what can we do? He's like, there's nothing we can do about it. And I had another one say to me that it was not relevant, which I was shocked. It was not relevant because every child deserves an education. Now, I'm an exchange student mom to 3 students over the last 5 years. My girls cannot come to America and go to school in our schools unless they were at a high level of knowing English because they did not want those students to take away from our kids. So I want to know, why is it that illegals can come in and go to our schools for free and take all of the attention from our teachers who don't know Spanish and helping them, and other languages too, and they don't have to meet certain requirements like an exchange student who comes from another country with a visa. So if you can't do anything about this, please let me know. We've had politicians tell me, talk all over, and then they say, oh, I can't do anything about that. If you can't, who can you influence? What can you do? And if you can do something about it, what can we do? Because I have district people telling me there's nothing they can do, and principals saying the same thing.
That's what we
Whose turn is it?
I think you answered the energy one first.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah, to your question, I think this is why state school board elections and local school boards are so important. They're vitally important, is who goes into those roles, because they will be your voice and be able to take care of a lot of these things. The federal government has completely failed us with allowing so many people to come in. The high school right next to me in Riverton, the Mountain View High, or Mountain Ridge, excuse me, you know, the Harriman's mayor, Palmer, told me, Trent, we've had over 300 people from Venezuela that we've had to admit to the school. It's 10% of the student body population.
30%.
30% now? I mean, it's alarming. It really is that's going on. And so it's a collaborative effort. I want to get back there, seal the border, remain in Mexico policy, deportations. We have the E-Verify for sure. But we need state leaders in particular that are going to pass legislation that won't magnetize and reward behaviors. Because when we keep rewarding illegality, we're going to get more of it. And so, and then the local school boards are going to be very, very important in terms of election.
Yeah, so the estimate is that and Trent alluded to this, that 6 to 8%, 6 to 9% actually, of our state budget in education comes from the federal government, right? So I have been talking, and in fact, I brought this up at an event that we did in January earlier with legislators about an analysis that would take a look at what the compliance costs of that 6 to 9% are. This is all created by federal policy and federal lawsuits. Here's when it comes to what Trent said, he is absolutely right on this big point, and that is we are failing because the federal government has been turned to and looked at as the solution to everything. We will not restore the appropriate balance of government until state leaders step up and start doing the right thing for the people in their states. The state is going to have to push back against the federal government on funding. We can try all day long to cut it at the federal level, but until state leaders stop taking it and explain to their people why this matters and how we can get just as good of an education, if not better, without those funds, nothing's going to change. So our hands are tied by the courts and by federal policy if we don't have state leaders who push back.
We're gonna wrap up. Everyone has questions. I will say this. I wanted to give the last question to the Shaddocks for hosting. But I'd also like to say this before we turn over to them for the last question. Both of these would be far better than Brad Wilson. Okay, that's my opinion. But what we cannot do at convention is end up fighting with each other as delegates and then splitting the vote so that you end up getting an established person too. So just be aware of that. Final question, Chad or Misty, where are we at?
I'll pose it. First of all, I want to thank both of you. This is you walk in not really knowing what to expect, and we were hoping not to set either of you up. And there was some tension here and there, but I thank you from the bottom of my heart because I see two patriots who love our country, and I'm grateful. After my question, each of you respond. You guys are welcome to hang out, ask questions as long as these two can stick around. That way, anybody who needs to go can get, but informally, let's ask what we can while we can. My question for you is about the interaction between the state's right to decide how to carry out their elections and federal impact on that. The Constitution leaves it to the states, but the federal government does have some influence. On March 20, I'm arguing before the Court of Appeals for two moms who sought out what were supposed to be public records on elections. And the lieutenant governor threatened the counties and said, we'll sue you if you give it to them. And so here we are. Lower court ruled against us. We're going to the Court of Appeals. We may win, we may lose. It blows my mind how publicly available information is not available. And that's something to take up with our state representatives. I recognize that. What can either of you do to impact at a federal level how our elections are conducted? Because if we don't have a voice, we don't have a country. That's right.
So I'm so grateful you're doing that. One of those moms is a big supporter of mine and has endorsed me. I will say that those who work with me on the ground have seen and know the work that I've done over the years. And the last thing we want, you are correct, is the federal government in our elections, right? But we have a situation right now where we have a whole lot of people being imported and they are being given forms that allow them to check if they would like to be registered to vote. We also have another problem with regard to, if any of you know what ERIC is, I'll just briefly say, it's a system where we send not only all of our voter data to this organization with no brick and mortar office, with 3 employees, and the guy who started it and was leading it in FOIA emails when he was working at the Justice Department said that he despises Republicans. And their number one job at ERIC is to register new voters. They have not only all of our voter data, but they have, and we all send it willingly, well, we don't. Our state government does. They have all of our DLD data, which is our driver's license division. And by the way, in Utah, we have made it so that illegal aliens can receive driver's licenses. So how do you think that data might be used? So we need, and the federal government is facilitating a lot of this. I do not want the federal government in our elections, but what I do want is them not encouraging and facilitating the voting in federal elections, which they are doing right now for president in these forms. No way should they be allowed to do any of that. And I will say this, I worked on some legislation this year that offers a whole lot of transparency into what our state government is doing. A framework was put in place for us knowing and understanding what happens with all of our data. It gets so much worse than what I just told you. And we need to know how that data is being used and where it's being sold, because that is the big threat. And when we speak truth and we speak out on these issues, people can understand them and they will come our way on them when we know how to explain a lot of the intricacies involved.
Well, I don't want the federal government involved in local election either. And that's we gotta stick with the Constitution. They understood that the time, place, manner of elections. That's something that we need to be able to keep maintained here at the state. And there are so many things that they're trying to push under the table right now to influence the way in which we vote. I'm a big proponent of paper ballots, and I hope they do it at the convention. Photo ID. And can we get back to a voting day? Yes. Not a voting month, please? So let that rest with our state government. And I know there have been efforts to try and have this vote by mail is mandatory shall to may. But I've also seen really, really insidious efforts from organizations like Fair Vote and those that want to push ranked choice voting, and they want the national popular vote. Please, 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 we need to speak with our local elected officials. That would ruin things. I mean, we shot that down. Unfortunately, we had the first year it came available. I had 3 council members that wanted to try ranked choice voting, even at my pleadings, don't do this. The next go around, fortunately, everybody said, no, we're not going to do this. But with national popular vote, it's a big, big problem. I mean, our founders knew that we needed to have a constitutional republic. And people have asked me, is there anything in the Constitution changed? Yeah, the 17th Amendment. This very office we're running for. I think we should go back to the way our founders had laid it out, where it's state legislatures that actually appoint senators.
Do both of you support making Election Day a holiday?
Yes, we're there. Yes. And Chad, can I say one thing about the convention? I'm working with a group of people that has been meeting with the convention chair and vice chair in order to ensure, and I was asked, can you get the other candidates on board? I talked to a number of them today because we had an event earlier. I didn't ask you. I'm going to add your name to the list because it sounds like you're there. We need paper ballots. Yes. Where we can have full auditing and where we sequentially numbered paper ballots, by the way, in different colors so that in every round there's no gaming of it and it can be fully audited. So glad to hear you're on board with that, and we are meeting in order to ensure that we have our best chance of that being the way it's set up at convention.
I'm glad to hear that. I've had committee like Ron that have asked me about that. Yes, absolutely. For the last couple of months, been saying we need to do that.
I just want to ask both of you a question. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have to do this. Okay? They're tearing apart the family unit and they're de-incentivizing it. What are we going to do to put the families back together? Nobody's focused on that. I've heard. I went the whole night. Nobody's focused on putting families back together. That's the number one problem in this country, and we have to address it.
Yeah.
What can we do to address it? What can you guys do to help?
I think you're first.
Well, I said that on my website for 10 months now. I said my 3 priorities, what I'm going to champion every day as your senator, is smaller government, safer families, and a stronger economy. And the policy prescriptions that I have are on my website. You can go see them, but it's getting rid of the Department of Education, right? Second Amendment, and also separation of woke and state. Do not fund these programs that the Biden administration have wholeheartedly endorsed, pushed down to our military, to our school systems, you name it. That needs to stop. That's what the federal government can do. But as a mayor, I've always pushed and advocated for the family and the family unit. That is something that if we have strong families and strong communities, we don't look to government. What the left wants to do is to create a culture and climate of dependency. And we got to stop that. If we have strong families, we don't have that.
Okay, let me
I'm just doing
Thanks. So, when I was serving in Czechoslovakia, one of the things that I asked people is, why is it you had 40 years of communist rule? Why is it that nobody's children and grandchildren come to church, only the old people? It goes to that. These children were put into public institutions, right, at the age of 2 or 3 years old, and they were taught to tell on their parents. And so their parents would not teach them about their beliefs because there were lots of threats if you did that. You could kind of slip under the radar if you kept your mouth shut, even though the government knew that you were religious. and attending church, but if you tried spreading that at all, the threat was real. So they did not teach their children until they knew that they were disciplined enough to keep their mouths shut. Guess when that happens? 14, 15, 16. How many of us have raised teenagers? Good luck. The children turned on their parents. I will tell you, I say all the time, and I regret that I didn't say it here. We were at an event earlier today, and it was my opening. But I don't give memorized speeches. I go with where the questions take us. I will tell you this. Our politicians say all the time here in Utah, we are doing great as a state. Look at all this legislation we passed this year. My response always is, we are doing great as a state because of the stability of our families that is driven by our faith in God. Make no mistake, that is what makes this state unique. That is what makes this nation unique. And only as we return to those principles do we restore the constitutional balance and the constitutional principles that built what we all grew up with.
I'm going to wrap up the formal part of this. You're welcome to mix and mingle or mosh. It's kind of tight in here. And we thank you again so much for your time. God bless both of you. Thanks all of you for coming.
Thank you.